My name is Ted Gardner, and I'm the interviewer for the Library of Congress program, which is so beautifully carried on here at our main library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And today we have with us the Honorable Frank Lukas, and that's Lukas with a K, by the way. And I'm very fortunate. Frank and I became friends through Veterans Affairs over the last few years, and it's an honor to be here with him and to probe his memory. And Frank, one of the things I want to ask you is, were you born and raised here in Cincinnati?
No, I was not. I was born and raised in Cleveland.
In Cleveland.
And I entered the Navy from the Cleveland Point. Well, it's rather involved. Actually, let's take it a step back a little
Sure,
bit.
your education.
I was at Kent State University where I met my wife.
Okay.
And at the end of the spring term, the Ravenna Ordnance Plant, which was some 16 miles from Kent, was advertising for help. And this was a huge plant under construction. It eventually covered 22 square miles.
Wow.
So I applied, and I got a job in the Public Relations Department.
Now, when was this? 19?
This was in 41.
41.
Before Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And the plant was under construction, but as soon as Pearl Harbor struck, all the activity just about doubled. And it was a heartwarming thing to see that people were taking it that seriously. We didn't know what it was, of course, but we soon found out. But getting back to Cleveland, which is my hometown, Shaker Heights, actually.
Oh, yes.
And
You went through the school, elementary and high school there?
oh yeah, I went to Shaker Heights High School, graduated from there, and then I went on to Western Reserve and then to Kent State. I was going to be a chemistry major. I was a chemistry major, but back in 1936 and 37, money became short, so I had to stop that, and I was out for a while. And when I resumed, I went to Kent and took on a completely different slant, and that would be in photography. I seem to have had an aptitude for it.
Wonderful.
And you follow your heart, you know. And I was going to revolutionize the chemical business, of course.
Of course.
Until physical chemistry came along. So that was the story. And I met my wife in Kent at school and went to the ordnance plant. And from the ordnance plant, I went into the Navy.
And now, how many years have you been married?
Married?
Married.
63 years.
To the same woman?
Same person.
How about that?
My wife was a school teacher, and when she would tell the kids how long she was married, they were aghast. The same person? They don't do that anymore.
I know, that's a rare situation. Well, that's very interesting. Then when Pearl Harbor came, you were working, and what did you and your colleagues and compatriots think? Say, for example, the day after Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor? Well,
Did you think right away we've got to get into it, or what?
oh, we were in it right away, of course. And the ordnance plant was, as I say, a huge endeavor. There were 4 load lines. One of them was to build 75 millimeter artillery shells. Another load line is doing 250 millimeters, and it's the larger ones.
Wow.
Finally, the 4th line was building bombs as large as a 4,000 pounder.
Oh my goodness.
And to get back to your question, I was in the Public Relations Department, and we began a big flurry of trying to answer a lot of calls that are coming in. Now, what are they going to do with the arsenal, they call it? And of course, we we were employed by the Atlas Powder Company, who was the contractor to the ordnance department.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, I was employed by the Atlas Powder Company.
Right, right. Well, that certainly puts you right into the to the home front thrust of building war material.
Yes. Well, being in the public relations department opened up a lot of avenues. For example, we were required to make aerial movies of the plant under construction. And for that, we traveled to ACORN to get onto the Goodyear blimp.
Oh.
And that was about a 40-mile trip. And then we'd make our flights around the camp, taking still photographs and movies. They tied the door of the blimp open, and I sat on the floor with the foot on either side of it, and I wasn't tied in. And the more I think of that,
I know. Wow.
of course, you know, the thing will rock and pitch.
Of course.
But they said there was a fellow standing behind me. I was hoping so. We made the movies, but that was required. Then we had to photograph every single structure
Right.
under construction.
Right. Now this was a Goodyear blimp.
Yes.
It was owned by the company. Yeah. Well, that's the reason I asked that question is, as a boy growing up nearby, were you aware of the great dirigibles that the Navy had before the war started, like the ACORN and the Los Angeles and so forth? Were you aware of those big dirigibles?
Aware
of the big dirigibles?
Oh.
Like the ACORN?
Oh, I see. Yeah, you mean the aircraft?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
they were Navy ships.
I was a great aviation enthusiast as
Oh,
a kid.
I'll bet you were.
I built model airplanes and ROGs that went off the ground.
Right.
And so I, you know, if you've gone through the Depression years,
Yeah.
and I have too. And I was applying to the Navy Department as a model builder.
Really?
And after I started college, I got notice that yes, I was accepted as a model builder, but I couldn't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And even now I have scale models that I have built for myself.
Oh, those are treasures.
I'm
Wow.
proud of that.
I should say.
So I joined the Navy. They put me in the airplane Navy.
Well, with your knowledge and your experience in the chemical industry, and then with your interest in photography, obviously the Navy recognized this.
Somebody recognized something, but I don't know what it was. But what I had to show them when I applied for a commission in 44, January of 44, I at that time was supervisor of public relations for the Atlas Powder Company there. Also, I taught photography at Kent State at night.
Oh, you did?
So there were two items that probably eased the way. And
Exactly.
1 month later, I got a commission.
How about that? Well, that's great. Did you have to go through V12 program or anything like that to get your commission, or were you?
No,
You were.
I filled out an application there in Cleveland, where they had a district office, and apparently I had enough that they might be interested in.
Practical experience, sure.
And then I was sent down to Florida for the indoctrination program, which was a little over 2 weeks.
Right.
2 months, rather.
Well, you mentioned that Florida stint down there. Tell us a little bit about how tough the life was.
No, she couldn't go down there.
Yeah.
But we stayed at the Hollywood Beach Hotel. I'm repeating this for the benefit. And gee, pretty nice, except there were 6 of us in a room. And when the reveille sounded, we didn't know whose face we were shaving. Then we go down to the main dining salon, but dining room, to organ music. I said, gee, this Navy is all right. But that changed.
That changed. What was your first assignment to go overseas, for
The
example?
first assignment?
Yeah.
Well, I had to go through the Codes and Ciphers School at Harvard.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm jumping ahead of the program here, but
Right.
after the indoctrination program, I got orders, as we all did, and the boys opened up their envelopes to see where they were going. Some were going to Hawaii, some Alaska, so on. And I couldn't wait to open mine. I opened mine, and it was like a lead balloon falling. It says, report on such a date to Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I said, oh, why me? All these guys are going out all over the world.
Right.
I'm going to school. So, arriving at Harvard, we were assigned dormitory rooms and so on. And on the Harvard Yard, which is the old yard, I was in the building called Matthews, and I had to share the room with 4 others. And we had given our program of classes, and we had to learn the Morse code, which everybody had to know. We had to learn semaphores,
All the
flags, flag bag,
Yeah.
all that business. And then in a day or two, they marched us into a classroom past armed Marine guards. And I thought, what's this? And it turns out they locked the doors and they introduced us to the electronic ciphering machine. And we thought, oh, this is the ECM. It was the most sophisticated device yet known. So we were taught how to operate it. We were taught how to handle the codes. And this was not an overnight thing, because you couldn't take anything out to static. So everything is memory. So at the end of 3.5 to 4 months, and we had complied with all the requirements, we were to move on and be placed on trial basis at different air bases. Now, one of my classmates, after all that memory work, said he felt mentally constipated, which I think was the right term.
Overload, huh?
Oh, boy.
Well, that was quite an introduction then, because a boy from the Midwest going up to Beantown and being on that prestigious campus.
Let me tell you something about the ECM, if I may. Have you got time?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We're looking at a standard typewriter keyboard with 2 or 3 more whistles around it and a little chest in the back, which when they opened it, there were some wheels set vertically, maybe 4 of them, about that big around, which were a whole network of interconnected wires. So that when you struck letter A, it might activate one wheel, which then in turn would do another and another, or it might not. And then finally print what you decided to print, according to the code. So we thought, if without putting anything in the typewriter, and we started typing, nothing would come out. You could strike A 10 times, you get 10 different letters.
How about
So
that?
what kind of a high-priced thing is this? But we soon learned that it was a very...
Very technical and very involved, yeah. Now, did you do deciphering as well as
Oh, yes.
ciphering?
We both enciphered and deciphered,
Right.
classified material,
Right.
and one of the things we had to learn to do also in that Harvard program was to touch type 40 words a minute.
Right.
I thought, well, now what's happening here? Are we going to be doing stenographic work too? But it turns out that if you didn't know touch typing, at 40 words a minute isn't much.
No.
With guys with 10 thumbs, you know it is. When you come into the code, which comes up to you as a code breaker as unpronounceable 5-letter groups. When you have a series of those, and you must interrupt for some reason, like stopping to swat the bugs in your head and so on. If, with ordinary plain language, you can remember what the last 2 words might be. But when you have a whole mess of 5-letter unpronounceable groups, you don't know where you are, so you have to grab a pencil, quickly make a mark, and then beat the bugs off your head. So that's where touch typing came in handy.
Sure, sure. And if you were ambidextrous, that helped too.
Furthermore, are you going to clue me as to when we have a break or something, or?
Well, we'll just go on. If you want to stop. If you want to stop, that's fine.
I want to tell you something about the codes.
Yes.
The codes were printed with water-soluble ink. Which means that if you were aboard ship and you were in distress, all the communication the man had to do was throw the books over the side and the ink would wash off. That's all well and good. But I remember one night in the monsoon on Palawan, oh my God, when my codes began to take a little different character. The humidity was so high that you could cut it. Now, I lived with the aerological officer, and he recorded 11.3 inches of rain in 24 hours.
Oh my goodness.
And that's something. And so the air was so drenched that even the letters began to move a little bit. Well, I couldn't blot because I had to remove it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything else. So here I am in 90-degree heat standing my code. Which saved one day's code at least.
Well, I should say.
That changed every day.
Right. Well, you mentioned the island of Palawan, and of course that's a very interesting part of the world on the western edge of the Philippine archipelago. How long were you there?
I was there just short of a year, and I want to bring up one of the side remarks.
Absolutely.
Bring up. Our camp, when we arrived one at dusk at Puerto Princesa. We could not touch a dock because our draft was such that we couldn't come that close. So we could see the darkness in one little bulb burning, and we thought, this is either our friend or our enemy. So came dawn, we found out what it was, and the whole place was permeated with the odor of pungent odor of rotted coconuts and palm fronds and so on. It was just heavy. Well, when we offloaded then, we were set up in tents. Meanwhile, they were setting up Quonset huts right in the middle of the coconut grove, which was on sandy soil. And referring back again to that monsoon and 11 inches, the water just washed alongside, washed over the sandy soil, making you think you were in the middle of a river. Mm-hmm. That's as much water as I ever want to see again.
Wow, I should say.
And of course, all of our Jeeps were all level up to the gunnels. We had to poke the holes open and so on.
Wow. Yeah, the living conditions under that sort of a seasonal thing was pretty tough.
Well, it was hot. By 11 o'clock in the morning, it was 90. And it was only then that the convection currents would begin to circulate and give you some kind of air movement. Mm-hmm. And you were constantly moist. You couldn't avoid that.
Right. You didn't get jungle rot, did you?
No, but I had a deer infection given to me by an eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor.
Oh, wonderful.
He was poking around there when he should not have.
Right.
I lived with him, with the doctors and so on. But what else can I tell you?
Well, tell us some more about being ashore there. And of course, you were in contact with airplanes.
Oh yes, We were the home base, Navy 3291, for squadrons of 4-engine bombers, long-range bombers with single rudders.
Mm-hmm.
They were what we know as the Liberators, but only with one rudder, and they were called privateers.
Mm-hmm.
And the assignments were to take off in the morning from an 8,000-foot runway and fly all the way down to Singapore to observe any movement of 2 cruisers the Japanese had. It was important for the people to know where those cruisers were.
Sure.
So these were on a routine basis, and of course, as you see from the photograph, a lot of them didn't make it.
Right.
Now, that was a flight of around 13 hours.
Wow.
It's a long time.
Yes, I should say. But aboard the privateer, what were you doing?
I wasn't aboard.
Oh, you were not aboard?
No, I was strictly ground.
I see.
My main duty was my codes and ciphers,
Right.
and being photo officer was a secondary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to, I think I probably told you about being assigned, my commanding officer being assigned by his commanding officer to set up a photo department. I think we talked about that before.
I think we looked at some of that sort of thing there.
Can I repeat that?
Your phone, sure, please do.
Well, my commanding officer was a commander, and he was in charge of ACORN 47. And his commanding officer was a man who was the commander of Fleet Air Wing 10, who was commander of the whole area there.
Hmm.
And he ordered my commanding officer, Campbell, to quickly set up photographic facilities so that they could have photographs by 4 o'clock in the morning of the previous day's strikes and ready at ACI to observe and then carry on from there.
Mm-hmm.
So my commanding officer turned to me, he said, "Luke, can you do it?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I can." So I got the last Quonset hut available, and I designed a photo department, photo lab, and Holston and the torpedo plane and I took off for Guyana, that's right above the Leyte Gulf, where the Navy had a huge supply base.
Uh-huh.
And we loaded that airplane with all the materials and supplies that I needed. And we flew back, and when the Quonset was finished, we had a grand opening, and I was assigned a complement of 6 photographers' mates, which we put into circulation. And they would have the materials ready for ACI at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
So that took care of itself pretty much. But I think the captain was relieved that I could handle it because it wasn't any problem for me. I had done that
Of
before.
course. Well, they were lucky to have you with your experience and knowledge. I should say, I can see how he would be relieved, you know, feeling, well, my goodness, we've got a man here who really knows how to handle it. Well, that's terrific. So you were on Palawan for just short of a year, you say?
Mm-hmm.
And that was
we arrived on the 1st of April, the last day of March, actually, and I boarded a huge seaplane tender on February the 2nd the following year.
Mm-hmm.
So I had just a year there.
Right, right. So you crossed the international date line.
Yes, you could feel the bump.
Oh, yeah, sure. At what altitude?
Can I give you a couple of
Yeah, please do.
episodes here?
You bet.
While I was at Harvard, I was an honorary member of the Hasty Pudding Club.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is a prestigious Harvard club.
Oh, yeah.
They gave all the officers tickets. I still have it. Anyhow, while all the building was going on out there at the air base, they had built us a chapel. It was made of bamboo, and it had a thatched roof and a dirt floor, and they had wooden benches fastened somehow to the ground. It was a multi-denominational church building. One breezy Sunday morning, the minister was talking to his congregation, and he's about any misdeeds they might have done during the week. And he said, now, let us all bow our heads, and if any of us have transgressed during the week, just raise your hand. Well, somebody in the back of the chapel wanted to see who transgressed, and it's a good thing, because the curtains back of the altar wafted over the candles, and the next picture we saw was the flames going up. And luckily, our fire department was 400 yards away, so we got them there in a hurry, and there was no big damage. That could have been toast.
Oh my goodness! I think some spirit was trying to make a message there. Oh, that's wonderful. What else do you remember
Well,
from
I'll
that?
tell you something else now. Being out in the coconut plantation for a year, and you learn to walk around coconut trees, because those nuts, when they drop from 30 and 40 feet, they could kill you.
Boy, big things.
So you took a circuitous route around anything standing upright. So when I came home back to Cleveland, my wife and I were walking down the street, and I'm walking around the telephone pole, and she said, what are you doing?
Old habits are hard to break, aren't they?
After a year of that, anything that stood upright, I walked around it.
Oh, that's funny. Did you intermingle with Filipinos?
Not really.
Yeah.
Of course, as officers, we had our own laundry, and the enlisted men would have their laundry done by Filipinos who
Right.
would make some money. And a friend of mine, who I learned later was in Cincinnati, was on the Army side of the airfield, sitting in his tent alone, when the tent flap opened, and here was this raggedy-looking person standing there, and Jim said, nothing today. And the person just stood there, and Jim said, nothing today. So we left. It was the Japanese trying to surrender.
Oh, for heaven's sake. How about that? Oh, well, it's...
When we landed, we had a lot of emergency, well, we had to take care of our food and so on.
Yes. Yeah, let's talk about some of these things you brought here.
Before any commissary or any food preparation was prepared, we were all tossed a whole bunch of these boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if your lens will pick this up or not, but these are K rations. And they come in a wax-sealed container, and each container is a meal in itself. Now this one is oh, I got the wrong side. Assorted biscuits, bouillon cubes, and they tell you to add to 2/3 water and boil it for soup. You get a confection, you get cigarettes, you get chewing gum, and a nifty little package of toilet paper.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and the confection was a Hershey bar, but you wouldn't believe it because it was so full of cereal that it wouldn't melt in the heat.
Oh.
And so if you like chocolate cereal, that's what we had.
That's just amazing. That I never had any. I was always shipboard, you know, and so we didn't have anything like this because the ships I was on were all had a galley and cooks and so forth. But this is very interesting. Open inner bag carefully. It may be used as a waterproof container for matches, cigarettes, and other items. For security, hide the empty can and wrappers so that they cannot be seen. Now, how about that? So you had to be security-wise with your food, too. That's very interesting. Now, what do you have here, Frank? What is this?
Well, this is a first aid kit.
Okay. Everybody had one of these?
Well, I guess I should have had, yes.
Yeah.
You can pull this out. If you take anything else out, it has to go back like a jigsaw puzzle.
Right,
You can
right.
pull that out. This
Oh.
is a reflecting mirror.
Sure.
If you're shot down
Sure, you can
on
signal.
sea or
Yeah.
on land, you can sight the airplane through that crosshair,
Right.
and presumably the reflection would beam back to it.
That's a very, very important thing for survival.
The medicines in there are all rotted, of course.
Yes.
There's morphine and there's whatever else.
Yeah. Did you have things like Band-Aids?
Band-Aids. I never used it then, no.
Well, that's really something. Now, you could, how would you, oh, you could put it on your belt, right? I see. Isn't that interesting? Well, that's a durable piece of canvas there. Oops, got a lot of dust in it too, Frank. Now, what's this little container
Well,
here?
that's also a container of sulfa.
Oh, that's sulfa for wounds.
Sulfur. You peel off the red strip,
Yeah.
and apparently there are bandages there with sulfa on one side
How about
for
that?
emergency use.
Now, this was the days before penicillin.
Yes.
Sulfa was the main healing medicine for wounds and that sort of thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, that used to be about the state of the art at that time, too.
It was.
Sulfa.
It really was.
Do you remember what they used to say about APC? Have you heard about APC tablets? Did they have them when you were there?
That was,
Well,
yeah.
it's really a strong aspirin, and the saying was that if you couldn't see it, take an APC,
Right.
and you'd be all right.
Supposed to be the heal-all thing. You got some other interesting
Yes, I'd
anecdotes
like
there?
to tell you about this. Water supply. When we landed, we had Lister bags, named after Lord Lister, the English scientist.
Sure.
And they're nothing more than a great big sack with a spigot at the bottom, and they would suspend it from a framework or a tree limb or whatever, and fill it with water, which were trucked in from a big tank. Now, there was just enough seepage through that bag to evaporate, to give it a little bit of a cooling effect,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't improve the flavor. You know about that.
Oh, terrible, terrible taste. But, you know, things like that kind of kept you going.
Yeah. So, continuing on the water, when the camp was finally organized and built, they sank wells off some distance from the shore, and they could draw filtered water right up for general use. Well, as the camp grew larger, there was a greater demand on the water than it could supply. Therefore, we were treated to saltwater coffee, saltwater lemonade, saltwater milk.
Terrible.
Whatever else.
Terrible
Until
stuff.
they got another well. So,
Yeah. So they really didn't try to desalinize, huh?
no.
Oh my gosh. Well, that was one of the things aboard a ship, you know. We had desalinization of seawater, but it was, as you say, it was a terrible flavored stuff. What else have you got there?
Had I mentioned the submarine code?
No. Go ahead with that.
One of the codes we had to learn at Harvard was the submarine code, and it was a lower grade classification. We hated to do it because it involved strips, which each strip had letters printed on it.
Mhm.
And according to the code of the day, you use certain strips. Now, you could only do this at night, and when everybody was tired. And we all hated to do that. Now, the reason for the night work is that at that time, there were no nuclear submarines.
Right.
And the submarine had to recharge its batteries by surfacing at night and letting the diesel engines recharge. Well, this is the only time the radio men were allowed to send out any message. Now, since the submarine was considered not expendable but vulnerable, they could not put an ECM machine on it. So we, whoever of us had the night shift would have to tackle that code. But on the other hand, having the night shift allowed you to see an absolutely spectacular, glorious sunrise.
Mm.
It was just breathtaking.
I bet it was.
And I'd walk out from our communications shack, which was maybe only about 40 yards from the water's edge, which was the Sulu Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be a low reef of coral or whatever it was. And at that time, if you stood still, you see little heads of hermit crabs come
How
out.
about that?
And all you had to do was flick this and they all disappeared. just
Sure.
like that.
Could you ever get a photograph of that?
No.
No.
And then we'd see the fishermen come back, the native fishermen come back with strings of colored fish. I'd never seen so many colored fish in my life.
Isn't that something?
But I often wrote home and told my wife, and still do, about this spectacular sunrises.
Yes.
To read the word.
And how about the night sky?
The night sky.
Night sky.
Yeah.
Because you were south of the equator, and of course you would see the constellations of the southern hemisphere.
I came off the night shift one time and went to my Jeep, and here was a monkey trying to fathom the rear view mirror. He looked one side and
Oh, that's wonderful.
and these were rhesus type monkeys, and they would go from treetop to treetop in colonies. And those branches would just sag, they'd shatter, and they'd make all kinds of racket. And once I got into my Jeep, one dropped in my roof, and he went that way, and I went that way, because I didn't know it was a monkey. You were aware and wary of everything.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned this Japanese that tried to surrender and was rejected, so to speak. Did you have any contact with any other Japanese?
Personally, no, but I had seen them come in, they'd straggle in. Now, our base was up the water level, of course, and the Japanese, after the invasion, were herded up into the mountains. There were 2,000 of them up there.
Wow.
But the Army had them corralled pretty much, and then they sent the Air Force to saturate bomb them.
Right,
But those that escaped would straggle down.
right.
And when they did reach Puerto-Princesa, any townspeople, they were treated very rudely.
Yes, yes.
It's in kind.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, they were persona non grata, so to speak. What else besides the island of Palawan? Were you stationed anywhere else in the Pacific besides Palawan?
That was my direct.
That was
my target area, and that's where I stayed.
right,
It was a combat zone.
right.
So, being an officer, being married, and being in a combat zone, I got quite a bit more than $50 a month.
I'll bet you did.
And I couldn't spend it anywhere.
Nowhere to go.
I sent it home.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So I was grateful for that. So one more thing I want to tell you.
Absolutely. Tell us more. We've got time.
We had air raids, which indicated that they were not pleased that we were taking over their airfield and expanding it. My next bed roommate in my Quonset was Steve Herzick. He was our bomb disposal officer. And his only other work before entering the Navy was being that of a shoe salesman. This is how they fit you into your category. So after an air raid, I happened to have drawn the officer of the day quarter at the main entrance at the dirt road. And Steve had been out there picking up these bombs. They were 1/3 kilogram bombs, which the Japanese dropped by the hundreds. And their ordnance wasn't that good. So Steve drove up in the Jeep to where my post was, and just to say hello. And I looked in the back. I said, "What you got there, Steve?" He saw 1/3 kilograms. I said, "Get the hell out of here with that. There's a whole back seat full of bombs." And he said, "They're okay. I defused them." He said, "You want one?" So like a dummy, I said, "Yeah, I'll take one." So I took it. I brought it home with me. I had it in my attic for years, and the more I thought about it, the more nervous I got. And I finally turned it over to the police department. So they had a range of some kind here in the city to detonate it or do something with it. And I learned later that they didn't know, they had never seen one like that. So what did they do with it? They threw it in the river.
Oh, no.
I could have done that.
I know. I know, and you could have kept that for a good souvenir. Oh, dear. Well, that, any more incidents you want to tell us?
Any more?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you about our trip home.
That would be interesting.
When my point total reached the right quantity for me to be secured from the base. But before I tell you that, I want to tell you that when the war ended and the professional people who were professional firemen, so on, were sent home, and others, like myself, had to take their place. So at one time, I was fire marshal. I was also first lieutenant, aboard
Sure.
ship. This is the guy that's the chief plumber. He's in charge of maintenance of the plant. And memorable there was that every morning I'd have 20 Filipinos lined up for a work party, and I had an enlisted man that could communicate. And he said, "What will it be today, sir?" And I said, "Same thing. Pick up the coconuts, pick up the fronds, don't let them that." And this troop would look at me like, "We did that yesterday." Well, again? Yeah, do it again, Joe. Well, so you had multitasks.
Oh, I
That's
see.
your origin. Well, anyhow, when I got on board ship, when I got news that I could go home on board the seaplane tender Pocahontas, which is a magnificent ship of the line, it was a short notice thing, so I packed my bag. The skipper says, "Can you make it today yet?" I said, "You bet I can." So I got my bag together, and I got my Jeep, and went down to the water's edge, and I had a boatman take me out to the Pocahontas, and went aboard, saluted the deck and so on. They showed me the room. I was occupying the squadron commander's cabin,
Wow.
alone.
First
So when I went
class.
back to the deck to leave to say goodbye to my friends, the EOD said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I want to go back and say goodbye." And he said, "You can't do that. We're leaving in 20 minutes. So somewhere there's a Jeep standing on the water's edge, and a boat will wondering when I'm coming.
Still waiting for you.
And never had a chance to say goodbye.
Oh, I know. Those things could happen
But
so fast.
the only assignment I had on board the Pocahontas was to get a good night's rest, get up in the morning, have breakfast, a nice, not stateroom, what do they call it?
Cabin?
Yeah, with brushed aluminum chairs and green leather seats and tablecloth and a busboy. "What do you have today?" It's the same Filipino boy would say, "Scrambled eggs." "Give it to me, Joe." I'd eat, go back, take a nap, get up in time for lunch. This is tough duty, Well,
And you were getting paid for
I'm
it.
getting paid for this. But somewhere below Guam, after we wove our way through the Philippine Islands, so we were somewhere below Guam, I woke up from my afternoon nap, and there was all kinds of activity on board ship. So I said, what's going on? Well, we had just passed a floating mine.
Wow.
And the lookout on the bow of the ship, all he could think of was hard right rudder, hard right rudder, hard right rudder. And of course, the ship doesn't turn that quickly. And here, everybody is throwing ordnance over the board, anti-aircraft material, pistols, anything. We got to, and the amazing part was that they didn't stop to detonate it.
Hmm.
They said they were calling it to the airfield over at Guam to come out and hit it.
Hmm.
So we went on our merry way. Well, when we got to Pearl Harbor, we had a 3-day stay there because they were taking off torpedoes, 100,000 gallons of aviation gas, and whatever else. So in that time, I had a chance to wander around, and I got into the submarine yards, and I got on board a Japanese submarine, which is the largest in the world. It was 100 yards long, and it carried 2 airplanes.
All right.
Had you heard about that?
I've heard about they call it the I-class.
Well, I was on it,
I'll be darned.
and they wouldn't let me look below because naval intelligence was combing it. But I was on board that baby.
How about that?
And they had, the conning tower was displaced, and in its place was a long cylinder with dog-down doors. And they had 2 airplanes, they were biplanes with folded wings back,
Wow.
end to end. And off the bow was a jet assist track.
Oh, yeah.
And the entire vessel was coated with about a 1-inch thick, looked like gutta percha or some kind of a mastic to absorb sonar impulses.
Oh, yes.
Well, that was the big. And then I got into the little. I got into the small 5-man submarine. And the only place I could stand up was in the conning tower.
How about that?
And the sanitary facilities and the cooking facilities were side by side. Now, I thought this is a little too much
Wow.
togetherness for anybody.
I should say.
But that was a captured 5-man Japanese submarine.
And you're a tall man. You're much taller than
6
most of
feet
the
tall.
Japanese. Yeah. Well, that is very interesting. You know, that class of submarine, they call it the I-class, that was the type of submarine that sank the cruiser Indianapolis.
Oh, it was?
When she was on her way to Lady Gulf, you know,
Yeah.
and was not zigzagging or anything, and that's how this Japanese submarine commander was looking through his periscope, and he saw this magnificent warship sailing in a direct straight line, heading, he couldn't believe. If you ever want to read that story about the Indianapolis, it's just an amazing story. But he testified in the court-martial of Captain McVeigh, who was the skipper of the Indianapolis, and the Navy was court-martialing him because he lost his ship. Well, the irony of it is that he lost his ship because the Navy had not given him orders other than to sail directly for Leyte Gulf, and here was this Japanese sub sitting out there, and the commander looked around and he couldn't see. It was unescorted. The Indianapolis was unescorted. They had just delivered some component parts of the atomic bomb.
Correct, yeah.
And the Japanese commander, couldn't believe his eyes. I mean, he'd never had such an opportunity in his life. He fired a brace of torpedoes. They all hit the ship went down. You know the rest of the story. Many of the men were eaten by sharks and died from exposure in the water because there was no intelligence about where the ship was or when it was supposed to come to Leyte Gulf. Well, anyway, that's another terrible story. Before we cut off here, Frank, you got any other reflections or ideas to tell us?
Let me tell you one more, just one
Yeah,
more
please.
thought. I was a member of the Summary Courts Martial Board, just one of the appointments I had.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was pretty busy.
You were.
Well, we had to have a trial. So the captain convened the court, and the offense was that some of our supplies were disappearing from the Navy supply dump, mainly sugar.
Typical.
Well, some enterprising enlisted kids they built us a little still, but it took a boat ride around to another part of the island to reach the site of it. Well, there were 3 of them involved, and when they were marched in before us, one at a time, with an armed guard on each side, eyes as big as, thinking they were going to be keel hauled or something, you know.
Right.
So we had all we could do to keep from laughing. It was painful.
Yeah.
But we had to keep a straight face, and all of them pled not guilty, that all they did was carry the water.
Oh.
They
They were not involved in the making of the
they all
torpedo
carried the
juice or
water.
whatever.
So for punishment, they had to stay at the camp 1 month after their separation time.
Oh,
That hurt.
that hurt, yeah. Everybody was going home
Yeah.
and they had to stay.
So they were in a compound.
How about that? Oh, that's an interesting story. I've never heard one like that. Well, Frank, this has just been wonderful, and it's so generous of you to impart to us your observations and experiences, which have been absolutely outstanding. I've never spoken to a Navy person before who had these precise experiences.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for that. As you know, this will go into the archives, and anybody, anytime, can draw Frank Lucas's reminiscences out, see it on tape, listen to your voice. It'll be wonderful for your family as well. And one thing more, I just wanted to congratulate you about your post-war civilian experience as post commander for the VFW over in Cheviot.
Yeah, it's Green Township.
Green Township.
We organized Post 10380 in 1988. I was the second commander, and there was a lot of work to do, just putting it together.
Of course.
And it's a very viable post now.
I know it is.
It's going very well.
I know it is.
And I have only one battle star, but as they say, that was not my lot to be elsewhere than where they put me.
Right. Well, thank you again, Frank Lucas. God bless, long life, and I know I'll see you again. We go to Dater High School on Memorial Day weekend, which is also a wonderful thing. And I want to remind you that Veterans Day, the 11th of November, right here at the Public Library, and this year it's on Saturday, 10:30 in the morning, they have the most wonderful Veterans Day ceremony. And I hope that you'll be able to come this year.
Well, I'd like to plan that.
Yes, put that on your calendar, and I guarantee you, you will be very impressed. They usually have a World War II veteran as a speaker. They have memorials made to those who have gone before us. They have patriotic music, and they'll get 300 to 400 people down there in the atrium of the library. So I'll give you a phone call just to remind you of it.
Appreciate that.
And we'll look forward to seeing
You have to be aware that I'm more and more limited now in how far I can go.
Okay.
I'm 91.
Right.
I'm glad to be here, and it's a little harder for me to make these excursions.
I understand.
But if I can, I'll do it.
I understand. Well,
I'm very
Well-
pleased to be here.
Well, you know what we will do, we'll make a point that if you want to come, we'll get somebody out there to pick you up and bring you down here and see that you get escorted at ease into the situation. Thank you again, Colleen.